when I came into treatment at Hazelden, I went up to Hazelden in late July of 1989, and I was beat up when I arrived there, but I was 22 years old. So I had gotten my lashings, I'd gotten the worst of the lashings, I'd got them done early in my life. And I showed up at treatment. They were going to pick me up, they're sending the shuttle guy from treatment to pick me up at the airport, and I am so nervous. I'm so out of my zone. I don't know what's about to happen. And there were a bank of payphones. There was payphones in those days. At the airport, I walked over to a payphone, picked it up, and just started talking. Just pretending, having a full-on conversation because I just couldn't be with myself and wait for this person. And this dude tapped me on the shoulder, and I'm like, hang on a minute. He's like, you must be Tommy. And man, to feel that low in yourself is a tough thing to come back from. And I walked in that building. Where I went at Hazelden, it was a young person's facility. So I think up to 25 years old. They would take anybody up to 25 years old, and there was a co-ed section, and then there was men only. They were a divided campus. And I got in there, and man, the very first thing they have you do is they sit you down and they have a talk. Now, this is 1989. And for those of you who may work in the field of treatment and recovery, you probably realize that things have really changed since then, and not necessarily for the better. But we have seen epic changes in the 30 years plus since. But you would go to the nurse's station, and they would sit you down, and they would say, okay, so this is your opportunity to tell us what drugs you have brought here. And I, like as insane as I was, I couldn't imagine bringing drugs to treatment. I couldn't even, I didn't even think of that. And when he mentioned it, I was like, why didn't I think of that? How could I have missed that? I was all sort of disappointed in myself. But I said, no, I have nothing. I didn't come. And they were like, you sure? I'm like, yeah, I didn't bring anything. And they're like, all right, well, we'll go through your bags. We'll go through your bags. So, I didn't bring any drugs. They went through my bags. While they're doing all that, they're taking your vital signs, and they're asking you medical type questions, and just making sure that you were of reasonably sane mind, even though not sober, really. And making sure you'll be safe, and they can take you into the facility, About a half an hour later, they came and they were like, let's try this again. The way this works is, all you have to do is be honest. And you just tell us if you brought anything here, and it's no problem. But if you don't tell us, then we have to not admit you, and you can't come in. And you'll be kicked out of treatment before you get to treatment. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. And they pulled out this, imagine a plastic baggie, except hard plastic. So it was like, it's sealed like a plastic baggie, but it was hard plastic case, filled with like pills and stuff. And I did what every drug addict has ever done. I said, I have never seen that before in my life. And I was telling the truth. I had never seen that before in my life. And they're like, we gotta tell you this is weird, because you've got Valium here. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this drug called Seconal. You've got Seconal here, which is a hardcore, I don't even know what you call it, a sedative, barbiturate. Hardcore, like, first of all, I never took pills, but they would know that, right, of course. You've got Valium, you've got Seconal, and then you've got these strange, like very strange set of medications here, like you have Tagamet for an ulcer. And you've got like this very strange, like, you know, a constipation medicine, and I'm like, I'm telling you. All right, tell me where you found that. And they pull out the little backpack, the little duffel bag that I showed up with the treatment. And it all comes clean. It all comes clear to me. I was at my father's house, and my father gave me his duffel bag, packed my clothing, and sent me off to treatment with his bag of pills. Now, my father, and contrary to what you currently believe, was not a drug addict. And I don't know what he was doing with Seconal, but that was just not his thing. But he definitely, I'm sure he took a Valium now and then, and, you know, whatever, prescribed medications, and that was whatever. But I said to the guys at treatment, I was like, you have to call my father, because that is my father's drugs. I'm sure I've been treatment with. And they were like, you know, wow, this guy is fucking, what a story, you know, this guy is. And so, you know, long story short, they called my father on the phone. He, of course, validated the story, but you can imagine he was mortified. I sent my son to treatment with drugs. Like, what parent could really say that? He may be the only one. He might be the only person, actually. So they worked that out. They were like, you're suspect to us, but you can come in, you know. And the very, very first thing I did, it was the afternoon, and there was a 12-step meeting so as I had mentioned, there was a split campus, co-ed, and men only. They took one look at me, and they were like, you'll be on the men only side. We don't even want to hear about it. You'll be on the men only side. That'll be the place for you. And I went there, and these 20 or so people were having a meeting. There were a few counselors there leading the meeting. And this was my first ever foray into a 12-step fellowship moment, a circle, and all of that. And it was also the first time ever that I had recited the Lord's Prayer, which I didn't really recite, but everybody was reciting it, so I was like, you know, it's my first moment in treatment, and it's not a good moment for anybody. I raised my hand right after the meeting, and I said, I just want to be honest. I just got here, and I want to be honest that this just isn't for me. And the entire place exploded in laughter. Exploded in laughter. And I was like, oh my God. And this one guy came up to me. He said, you know, actually, that honesty that you just demonstrated is going to serve you at some point. And there began my journey into treatment. I came to recovery kicking and screaming. No and why were my only two words. And I didn't plan this way. And so for the first couple weeks of treatment, my first experiences, I showed up and I did group therapy and I did one-on-one therapy with my counselor. And we did other meetings, and once a week you went on like the rehab bus to the gym, which was an incredibly demeaning experience. To be there, like you're on the bus and everyone's like, look at those guys, like the rehab people. Like it was so awkward on every level. And I couldn't take it seriously. I couldn't take any of it seriously. And so I was just kicked out of meeting after meeting after meeting. And I was that kid, and I think probably some of the people in treatment, if they do remember me, they don't remember me fondly. I was making fun of the whole thing. I just couldn't take it seriously. I knew I was in trouble. But this whole thing, with the culture of it was so insane. It really was. So I tell you that because you need to understand that the arc of my life, of my willingness to consider new things, my openness, my lack of arrogance was not there at that time. I was really a difficult person. And I was also, to a certain extent, you would have loved me in a wow, that's a playful guy. Wow, he's a lot of energy there, very gregarious, But I did not have my game together. And I struggled in so many ways, especially towards the end there. And I had cornered myself in life, hence having to go to treatment. 2 weeks into treatment, I was with my counselor, Pat Mitchell. She was this extraordinary woman. She used to call me Curly Top because I had epic hair. I had epic curls on my head, full on, crazy, ridiculous. I'll show you guys a picture later. And she called me Curly Top. And I had been raised really, my mother was there, but she was quite absent. She was really preoccupied with her life most of my childhood. That's how I see it. She definitely was there also. She wasn't like totally absent by any means. I would just say that in the earlier years of my life that she was quite absent in the earlier years, and I was raised by this English nanny named Rini. And Rini really was the woman who took care of me growing up, and she loved me. And I loved her. She left our home in a fit. Our home was falling apart. My mother's life was falling apart. My sister's lives were falling apart. My life was falling apart as children. And she left, I'm guessing, around when I was 8 years old. She was with me from 3, give or take, to 8 or 9. So really important years, right? And I didn't see her between when she left and like 2 or 3 years later. And my mother told me, I just heard that Rini has cancer and she's going to die. And she told me this as a child, like I was probably, by that point I was probably 11, something like that. Maybe more, maybe 12. I kid you not. I'm walking through Manhattan, New York City, the next day. And I now have this piece of information about Rini. And I run into Rini, who I haven't seen for maybe 4 years. The woman who raised me, who I know is dying. And I greeted her on the street and gave her a big hug, and I didn't let her know that I knew. She didn't let me know that she knew. And I just said, oh my God, I'm so glad to see you. It was a very strange moment, right? And then it went. I never saw her again, she died. But in treatment, my counselor asked me about her. Because I had told her, like, tell me about your childhood. And I said, oh, there's this woman who raised me. What happened to her? Oh, she died, but no big deal. No big deal. And the counselor went in one day, 2 weeks into treatment. And I had that cry for my whole life, for everything. It just didn't end. It kept coming. 20, 30 minutes of just collapsed and ugly cry, full on. And when it was over, there was a hole, an opening had formed. And grace became possible. Grace became possible in that moment. Before that discussion, it was not possible. And it was me against you, me against everyone. But at that moment, it happened. And when I speak and write about grace, there's a wonderful teaching called the Trinity of Graces. And the Trinity of Graces, we all say, here's a piece of good news. Iris is turning 17 years sober on April 17th, this Monday. And so what we would normally say in the program is, well, someone might say, I'm turning sober on Monday, God willing, And so what I would tell you, and what I have come to understand is that God's willing. That's not an issue. If I was, we're going to go out and use drugs or alcohol between now and Monday, it wouldn't be on God. Okay? Wow, God just wasn't on my side that day. No. The grace of God is ever present. It never goes away. It's always available. But it's the other two parts of the Trinity that are the question. So the second part of the Trinity is teachers and teachings. Have to have it. My teacher told me the greatest single jackpot of life for a human being is to find a teacher in this life. Because a true teacher can take you further than you could go on your own. And I have found that to be true in ways I'll never be able to express. So the grace of teachers and teachings, critical. So I use the analogy of a soccer field. Let's say the game of soccer and the pitch itself and the goalposts and the rules of the game, let's say all of that is God. Okay, well, the game is there. The game is there, and now you need to know how to play the game. And so you need instruction. You need a coach, teacher, you need teachings. You learn to play the game, and let's say you have the best coach in the world, and you're looking at the best soccer pitch you've ever seen, most incredible field. But if you don't step onto that field, it will not matter how good your coaching has been. It will not matter how beautiful that field is, how great the game is. You complete the Trinity. And it's super important that we remember that. So we have to be humble and open to teachers and teachings, and we have to be willing to step onto the field. And before that conversation that day, I was not willing to step onto the field. I simply was too guarded, too closed off, closed-hearted, closed-minded. So, anybody in here relate to the teachings of Jesus? Anybody here? Okay, some people have some history with that. Talk about some beautiful teachings that have been interpreted and also misinterpreted over the millennia. We can all, I think, agree on that. That'll be all right. And we understand that the philosophical foundation of the 12 steps is also coming from through that bloodline, if you will. And so here's a teaching. The meek shall inherit the earth. Now, at any point in any serious student of Christianity, that statement would have had to be confusing. At least confusing. At best confusing. Because it would appear in our understanding of those words that you would need to be weak or small or poor. And if you're weak or small or poor, you have a shot at inheriting the earth, whatever that means. But it seems big, and that would seem like something you'd want to inherit, It's like, wow. But that's confusing, because at the same time, there's this, I feel like I should go out into the world and provide for my family and create abundance if I can, and work hard, and it's a nice thing when money shows up, and that it's a wonderful blessing, and I'm so confused by this. What does this mean? And so this is this issue around words or interpretations, misinterpretations. 12 steps, and every religious tradition, every spiritual tradition has the same issue. So Jesus spoke in the street language of Aramaic. And so if you go back to Aramaic and you look up these words and you follow the etymology of these words, remember that we're going Aramaic, ancient Greek, Latin, Middle English. I mean, maybe 4 or 5 languages before we get to English with these words. Not to mention the geographical displacement of where these words were spoken originally. Like, we're talking about a really complex situation when it comes to understanding things. And the telephone game of passing things on down the line. Right? Well, it just turns out that meek in ancient history meant open-hearted and open-minded. And the earth was spiritual teaching or spiritual nourishment. So those with an open heart and an open mind could inherit, could understand the teaching, and everybody else would miss it. And I relate to that at the deepest, deepest level because I have been that person who said no. No. And why me? And I'm not even going to look at these teachings. Like, I wouldn't even recite the Lord's Prayer, not because I was born Jewish. I told you I was born bizarrely Jewish in a very strange family with regards to religion, and not in particular leaning one way or the other, but because that was religious, and look at all the pain caused by religion over the millennia, and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. But that was to blow off any possible positive thing that might have been there as well. Just to take this one idea and just take 2,000 years of history and just say all of it was bad. All of it was wrong, and religious people are wrong, and anybody who thinks along those lines is wrong, 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 wrong. And this is not a good way to think. But this is very addictive, very, very characteristic of an addict. This is addict thinking. We've lost the ability to consider a position, to reflect upon ideas and words and concepts and be able to learn. So that teaching of the meek shall inherit the earth, when we have the proper interpretation, becomes an extraordinarily powerful teaching. So no, I would not have been open to that teaching that day when I arrived in treatment. I would absolutely not have paid any attention to it. I would have blown it off. That's called contempt prior to investigation, which we hear a lot about in the halls of the 12 steps. So very contemptuous. And then, we get into this problem of who is passing down knowledge? Who is passing down the wisdom? What are we gathering around? Where are we drawing our power from? So I said to you, the 12 steps work 100% of the time. And I meant it, as long as you're able to get to the essence of those steps. Now, there's not one way, there's not one person like Joe and Charlie or anyone out there in the world who has the lock on the way to get to the essence of those steps. Infinite ways to any teaching. But there's also ways to not get to the essence. There are misinterpretations. And so I have met many people who were like, oh, well, they tell me nightmare after nightmare of the horrible people they encountered, or the terrible thing that took place, or they were shut down, or they were shamed, or they had an awful interaction. And most of them have never worked the steps. And if they did work the steps and they had a bad experience with it, it was probably because of either they weren't ready to receive, and/or a combination with the person that was passing it on couldn't find the right words to reach that person at that time. Not a blame game. And so this is important for us. I'm talking about the beginning of innovation. I'm talking about improving upon systems, having at least a discussion about it. I think it's important. There are fundamentalists in every path. who want to preserve things exactly the way they are. And there are other people that think that's not the wise way to go, that we should innovate as we move along, and that language gets antiquated, it gets misunderstood. You know, in 1935, when Alcoholics Anonymous was formed officially on June 10th, when Dr. Bob and Bill W. got together, and both of them had stopped drinking, and that was the first meeting ever. You know, they were middle-aged men who created a program primarily for men, who were primarily the worst of the worst of the worst of alcoholics. And there was a certain perspective and a certain cultural time. And so, you know, in my consideration of all of these things, I'm just simply interested in freedom. I'm interested in mine and yours. And so, how can we have that? I'm quite sure that the pursuit of truth, capital T, the absolute truth, the work we're doing in yoga, the work we're doing in the 12 steps, or any other religious or spiritual path that you pursue, I'm quite sure that this is worthy. And this is like the thing. Let's figure out what's actually true. Most of us see the world as we are, not as it is. But we want to see the world as it is, and in order to do that, we do have to work out our subconscious blind spots, and we have to see things more clearly. So Recovery 2.0 simply comes out of that curiosity, seeing that people have a lot of trouble with words like God, the gender reference to God, speaking about wrongs, changing that word to mistakes, looking at things from a slightly different perspective. Not because there wasn't a way to find the essence of the 12 steps in the way that they were written. Of course there is. Millions and millions of people in 80 plus years have recovered from their addictions in their work of the 12 steps, which works 100% of the time. If only you can get to the essence. And that's a big if. But it's there. So that's to say that there's a beautiful teaching in there. I know some of you are in early recovery. And sometimes people find their way to me. And it's kind of like, what do you got? You know. And I'm like, well, where are you at? Well, I'm, week sober, struggling with this, or a month sober, or 1 day sober, or not sober. Been sober many years, relapsed a lot lately, struggling right now. All right, have you ever worked the steps? And they're like, come on, what do you got? What do you got for me? And I'm like, oh, I'm talking to me when I was 22 years old. That's all. I know who this is. This is me. I was exactly that person. You don't want to hear about the steps. You don't want to look up on the wall and see God, higher power. That's not going to be my solution. Thank you very much. Someone's going to have to add the ingredient that's going to help you to change and open your mind, and that ingredient is love. But if you're not open to love, you're really in trouble. So what do I have? For the person in early recovery, I have the strongest urge and suggestion that you work the 12 steps. If for no other reason, then there's nothing bad that will come from it. Only good will come from it. So work the 12 steps with a sponsor, someone that you connect with and that you think has their game together. And that sponsor is there to take you through the steps and nothing more. They're not your therapist or anything like that. They're not your guru. They have had experience going through this process, and you can benefit from their experience. Go to 90 meetings in 90 days. We now have 30 plus meetings a week in Recovery 2.0, and they're incredible meetings, and we're so proud of it. If you resonate with our meetings, wonderful, come. If you resonate with any other meeting, wonderful, go there. But the thing is that you have to come into community. Obviously, one of the recipes, one of the ingredients in that recipe for healing is going to be coming out of isolation. And that doesn't mean just putting yourself in the middle of a group of people. It means that you have to start to share of yourself and listen to other people sharing of themselves. And so there's a real alchemy going on here. Are you with me? Okay. So for the person in early recovery, like, I can't tell you what a blessing it is that you've come to a place where you feel suffering enough to end up here. And it's not that I'm trying to send you away from Recovery 2.0, absolutely not. If you resonate with this work and you want to do this work, we've got sponsors, people familiar with the language of yoga. We have 12 steps, which are in the spirit of the original 12 steps with some slight word changes, but you can get to the essence and you can heal your life. And that foundation, I'm speaking today about the foundation. Once that foundation is set, this is, I mean, I don't know why this wasn't more clear. It wasn't expressed to me. You get to live your life. You get to have successes, you will have failures, you will have challenges, you will have joys. You're going to get to make mistakes all on your own and clean those mistakes up and move forward. You're going to have really amazing days and really painful days also, because that is the human condition. It's okay. If you bring yoga into it, with that foundation, it's been my experience that it's almost unstoppable. That I'm not arrogant up against addiction in any form, but I will say that the 12-step foundation and a powerful practice of yoga under the guidance of a teacher and community is a very hard combination to beat. Because you're making your mind and body system into an unwelcome host for addiction. Addiction's like, I can't get a hold on this guy. Shit, and it's like addiction, if you can think of it as an entity, think of it as an entity, as an energy. Belong God to you, What do you think addiction's favorite food is? If addiction is an entity and it needs to feed itself, what do you think addiction's favorite food would be? Fear is a good one. Fear is on the plate. Fear is on the plate for sure of addiction's favorite foods. What else?
Sugar.
Somebody say it.
Shame.
Shame. Favorite. That's the pizza pie for addiction. Your shame. Born in a fantasy. Lived on in a story. Guru Prem, my teacher, used to say to me, if you give energy to the fantasy of your shame, it's going to take you to places you don't want to go. That was a heavy statement. The fantasy of my shame. Had to unpack that. You mean to tell me that this feeling is not based in anything true? Of course not. You're a child of God. You're perfect. Only the mind can fuck that up. The work that we're in is a reductive process. You're taking something that's already perfect, that's been blocked, and that's been covered, and that's been conditioned. So the reduction, the process is to remove, not to add anything. You don't have to become anybody else. You don't have to learn anything else. You have to remove and let go, purify, detoxify. That's the process. The first detox is very gross, very physical. Anyone who's been on hard drugs, you understand, or alcohol, that detox is very physical, it's in your face and it's painful and it's awful. That's the first of 1,000 detoxes that you'll go through in your recovery if you're fortunate enough to come to long-term recovery. It is a movement from the gross to the subtle. You go subtler and subtler and subtler all the time, attuning. More and more subtle energy, more and more subtle energy, more and more. Detox. Mental, emotional, the past, memory, resentment, trauma. detox. Subtle. It takes a technology to do these detoxes. If you think you're done, as all of us, when I came off of my heroin and cocaine detoxes, it was an unbelievable victory. It was an unbelievable victory, but I had no idea that the work was just starting. And like any entrepreneur, it's a good thing you didn't tell me up front what was coming. Otherwise, no business would ever get off the ground if you knew what you were going to have to do. Oh my God. If I knew in 2013 what Recovery 2.0 was going to be and take, I don't know, man. There's an order to things. There's a divine order, and you need to know that, you take things in little bits. But when those first detoxes were over, for me, about maybe 9 months into my recovery, and I was working the steps by this point, I started to have a series of dreams, these nightmares. And in the dream, I would relapse. I'd smoke pot. I'd get high. And cannabis was a really, really huge thing for me. Huge thing. And my last words going to treatment, a friend asked me, "You're going to let go of coke and heroin, right? But you're not going to stop smoking pot." And I was like, "Dude, please. No treatment center in the world is going to get me to stop smoking pot. Okay, let's get clear on that." So that's where I was going into treatment. A year and 9 months later, I had a relapse in that first year. A year and 9 months later, I was sober and I was working the steps. I had these series of nightmares. And in the nightmares, I would get high. And in the dream, I would go to bed. Like, it's the end of the day. I'm going to bed in the dream. I'm still in the dream. I'd wake up the next morning. And I'm in the remorse of having relapsed in the dream. Fuck, I smoked pot. And I would go through that day and I'd smoke pot again because I felt so shitty about myself. I'd go to bed again in the dream, still in the dream. I'm not awake yet. And then after 3 or 4 days within the dream, I'd wake up. Like, really wake up. Like, get out of bed. I couldn't tell if I was sober. I literally was just like, trying to remember what I did last night. I think I went to a meeting. I'd call my friends on the phone and I'd say, "I have to ask you to dance. Did I relapse last night?" And they're like, "Dude, you relapsed? After we dropped you off? Like, you went out?" I was like, "Just take me through the evening." And they really, really thought I had lost my mind. Because in a way, I had. Now, what was happening? I had cannabis. It got so deep into my soul. And it wasn't enough. I would say, 30 days, it's out of your system. Trust me, it's not. That's the gross detox. That's the first detox. No. And I was seeing an amazing counselor at the time, and he said to me, "Don't you see the beauty of this?" And I said, these are painful dreams. First of all, I can't tell if I'm sober or not. I actually can't figure out if I'm sober. It feels to me like I used, but I can't put it together in time and space. I don't understand what's going on. I feel like I'm losing my mind. And he said, "Well, how did you feel in the dream?" I said, I felt terrible remorse. He's like, "Isn't that incredible? You got to experience the remorse of relapse without having a relapse." And then he said, "You must really want this thing." And I was like, "I do. I really, really want this. I want to be sober." And that was the first time I realized it. Like, this actually meant something to me. And the very next emotion, when I realized this actually means something to me, was tremendous fear. Like, now that I want this, oh my God, I'm going to have to really be careful. I'm going to have to really, and so from that day, maybe 9 months sober, so it would have been April-ish, 1992. From that month, I never had a thought again about using drugs or alcohol in any way, shape, or form. Never a single thought. Never had a craving. In that moment, it was gone. And it was gone forever. And the thing about that was, again, it was like a victory, an unbelievable victory for me. But I started to notice something else happening. I have been relieved, it's true, of drugs and alcohol and the desire to use them. Truly relieved of it, no matter what happened in my life, and there's been a lot of challenging things. But I was relieved of the obsession to use and to drink. But there was still the energy of addiction in my life. And I didn't feel it or know it exactly right away. I wouldn't have called it that at the time. But as the years went by, I started to identify this, what I call, and wrote about, called the frequency of addiction. That it is a frequency. That addiction is an energy and a force field, all of its own. And that until it's worked out deeply through these detoxes that I'm talking about, you would still be susceptible to addictive behavior, addictive circumstances. Your thinking would be addictive in certain ways, and you would draw other addictive people and circumstances into your life. Whether that be cigarettes, sex, relationships, money, all of the money addictions, food, technology, it really doesn't matter. And that's why I say, let's not get hung up on the substance. I mean, each recovery from different substances does have an idiosyncrasy to it. There are nuances to recovering from methamphetamine that don't apply to recovering from cannabis or opiates or alcohol. They all have their thing, and it's important to understand those things as a person in recovery, in the recovery, trying to help other people. But underneath it all, it's all coming from the same place. Recovery 2.0 came because after the year 2000, on January 2nd, I had reached a codependent bottom. And I had lived through, barely, the worst relationship of my life. A death-defying relationship, I would say. I lived through a death-defying relationship, and it was so painful for me. And it was the most painful thing I think I've experienced in this life, even beyond drug addiction. And there I am at 9 years sober, going into Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and vomiting forth my pain into that room. I can't put it any other way. And I did everything, and I worked with newcomers, and I had a sponsor. I did everything, but I needed something else. I wasn't healing. I was missing something. And I made a decision on the 2nd of January in the year 2000 that I would leave. I would not go back to the rooms. And I left. All my friends were like, you are in the grips of the disease. You are going to relapse. I mean, it was just all the stuff that you hear from people who are well-meaning and well-intentioned and have seen a lot of people get hurt when they leave. And so there it was, but I had no choice. I had no choice. And I had to go. And so I left. I had no intention to use or drink. I had no desire to. I was in earnest looking, and I was living in the frequency of addiction in terms of relationships and in terms of cigarettes and in terms of gambling. As a really psychotic gambler. Really, I took it all very far. But I'll just complete the sort of the creation story of Recovery 2.0. I've been an athlete and athletic my whole life. Love sports, love movement. It's always been an essential sort of part of me. I've gotten a lot of joy from that my whole life. But through my gambling addiction and through all of these other stresses and living in the frequency of addiction, even though I was clean and sober, my body was taking a massive hit from unbelievable amounts of stress. A kind of stress that I can't begin to describe to you. Toxic. You can't survive it. It's only a matter of time. And so the universe, God, Great Spirit, the greater intelligence that has influence in time and space, but still leaves free will up to us. The universe, in all of its kindness and compassion, struck me down physically and prevented me from being able to move. When that happened, and I was crippled for about a year, I could move, but I was in pain 24/7, bad pain. And I felt like you'd taken a gun and shot holes through my legs, and that I had no ability, no strength. If I was laying in bed and my legs were out here and there was a sheet over my legs, I couldn't lift the sheet up. I had no ability to move essentially below my waist. And it was just so painful and so awful. And I'm in a relationship with a woman who I got married to, and under these circumstances, it was a really tough and weird time. Nonetheless, I kept a positive outlook and kept a smile on my face and kept trying, even though on the inside I was like, oh my God, I'm in such big trouble. And I went to every healer. Some of you know this story, so I'm going to make it really short. I went to the hospital finally, Cedars-Sinai in LA, and the radiologist and the surgeon said that I had severe degenerative disc disease, severe herniations at L3, L4, L4, L5. They said, you're going to be on drugs for the rest of your life, and for this pain. This is severe, and it doesn't get better. It only gets worse. We've only seen it get worse. And we're going to have to operate on your back. And that was, Kia was standing next to me at the hospital that day, and that was what you call a bottom in recovery. My story is a story of second chances. And like I said, the kindness of the universe, it's unbelievable. So a friend came up to me that next week and said, if you want to fix your back, you should see this man named Guru Prem. And I said, no, I'm not going to see Guru Prem. I'm not going to see Guru anyone. I'm not interested. I can imagine they're going to be dressed all in white, long beard, the glasses, the turban, the whole deal, you know. And that night, Key and I went out to dinner across town in LA, and there was a woman there named Holly who we met that night. She just introduced herself to us and said, hey, you know, I've just gotten to Los Angeles. And we were like, oh, you know, wonderful. What brings you here? And she said, well, I hurt my back, and I'm going to see this man named Guru Prem. Same man. So I have said no many times, and the universe, I mean it, in its kindness, has said, listen, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way, you know? So I called Guru Prem the next day, and really, the rest is history. He was the teacher that I needed, with his love, with his penetrating contentment, which was a quality I'd not seen in anyone in my life to that date. I never met a content human being, truly content, but he had that. I said to myself, you know, I'm going to do whatever this man tells me to do. Now that's me stepping onto the field. Keep in mind that just a day previous, I refused to step onto the field. And if I had refused to step on the field the second time, that would probably have been the end of my life. And I guarantee you we wouldn't be sitting here right now. So I said yes the second time. And I stepped onto the field, and I did everything he told me to do. In 90 days of doing breath work and Kundalini yoga, and talking it out, my back pain went away. 90 days. Never came back. I've never looked back. 10 years later, 12 years later, I got another MRI. Took a look. Same exact spine. Herniations L3, L4, L4, L5. Even worse, degenerative disc disease. No pain. What does it tell you? What does it tell you? So maybe pain is coming from our mind, maybe, but I look at it a different way. I was dying of addiction, but it was a form of addiction that we don't recognize. And in this form of addiction, it writes itself so deeply into your body that you end up with problem, that different people diagnose in different ways. And none of them have the insight to understand what's happening at a deeper level, not because they're bad people, but because they're not operating within that parameter of healing, within that deep frequency of healing that Guru Prem was working within. And so, that addiction is the addiction to stress and the chemistry of that. And so I had to work out my stress. I'm still working on it today. But I had to really work out the toxic stress in my life. You might go out in the world and look at something, and it creates a stress response in your body. And in that moment, your body tightens up. Someone else might look at that same thing, but it's not stressful for them. And they just flow right through it. Imagine this is how you see the world. And your body is just stress. And eventually, that's it. The tension pattern is written into your body. You feel it as lower back pain. You feel it in your digestive tract. You feel it in some way. And there's nobody there to help you understand what happened and how to unravel it. Our solution? What is our solution as a society? Drugs. Yes. I consider it to be unfortunate. I'm not saying that there aren't drugs necessary at certain times. I'm saying I just wish there was more of an investigation into the things that can make you do that on your own, through the practices and through looking at your life in a certain kind of way. So I had to change. You know, I'd be there, I'll just show you, I'd be there like this with Guru Prem. He'd say, tell me, sit on your heels. Okay. And he'd be like, tell me about your struggles with women. And he'd say, while you're doing that, take 6 seconds, inhale, and come up to standing. And exhale, take 6 seconds back. And inhale 6, and we can do this together tomorrow if you want. It's so hard. It's so hard. And I'm talking to him about women, and I'm talking to him about my challenges, and I'm talking to him about lust, and I'm talking to him about, all the stuff. Why is he having me do that? Because there are meridians that run up the inside of your leg, right up into your groin, right up into the second chakra, that starts to move energy. And he's talking to me about, I'm moving like that, pouring sweat, making me do it, 15 minutes in a row. I can barely walk the next day. And he's like, well, Tommy, there's only 4 women you're ever going to meet. And I'm like, wait, I need to write this, I have 1,000 Post-it notes from his lectures to me. Only 4 women you're ever going to meet, from the heterosexual perspective. And for women, it's 4 men that you're ever going to meet, only 4. And that's a teaching, a template. As he's talking to me, as I'm going through this incredibly painful, energy-moving exercise to get balance, blood, prana into my second chakra and to start moving that shame and that guilt and that acting out along. You understand? It's another use of very therapeutic use, very prescriptive use of yoga. So that's what happened with me and him over 5 years. I came to see him once a week. And that's how Recovery 2.0 ultimately was formed. Later on, I would write the book. Key and I would go deep into Kundalini Yoga, into Hatha Yoga, Vinyasa Yoga, trainings after trainings after trainings, advanced trainings. We were just training. We were training ourselves out of addiction. I was training myself out of addiction. I was becoming strong. Not strong in necessarily the muscular sense, it's wonderful to have physical strength. It's an incredible thing. I highly recommend it for everybody. But I was talking about a different kind of strength. A strength more akin to vitality, power, functional, super functional strength. And it was working on a new level. It was working in my relationships, that kind of strength. I had the power to resist temptation in a way I had never been able to before, that kind of strength. And my mind started to change. My body changed. And all of these lessons, that he gave me. And then I started to encounter other teachers that gave me unbelievable lessons. And we started going to India, and we deepened our practice. And Kia, leading the way, helped me go deeper too. So that's sort of how we came to be here. In 2007, this is the end of the story. In 2007, I was on Martha's Vineyard. Who knows where that is? Okay. It's an island off the coast of Massachusetts. I was on Martha's Vineyard at a party with my uncle, and a friend of his said his son was living in LA, had just gotten out of treatment, and would I look in on him? I had not been to a meeting in 7 years, since the day I left, January 2nd, 2000. This was 2007. Sober, and learning and growing through the path of yoga. And that was my call. And it was relevant. And so I answered the call. And I started to get back into meetings, and from a completely different perspective. I started to embrace the 12 steps again, and I started to take this guy and many, many other people through the steps. Got back into it. I have not followed rules. I am utterly unconventional. But to the best of my ability, I have tried to help people get into the essence of those steps. And when you get in there, it works 100% of the time. And then when people ask to work with me, I always say, you're really asking for an ass whooping if you want to work with me, because you're going to have to do yoga. Because it's, for me, that's what it is. You're going to have to do the steps, you're going to have to do yoga. You're going to have to learn how to breathe, and you're going to have to work the shit out, because we're not going for abstinence here. We're going for long-term recovery and freedom. And so some people don't like that, and other people are willing.